There's always been discussion about, you hear football managers, don't you, say, strikers are not very hard to come by, and how difficult it can be to get a forward player in. I've got a bit of a question slash debate here. I believe a striker's role is different now. I think the way that strikers are portrayed is not of a quintessential striker. I know that my gaffer at Grimsby are struggling to find a striker. The big question is, how do you define a striker and a forward player? For example, my club Grimsby recently signed Brendan Keenan on loan from Walsall, whereas Walsall signed Danny Johnson. You've also got, as a forward, our former player Rico Souza. And then you've got somebody like Macaulay Longstaff at Notts County, or you've got Omar Bogle at Newport. I think the overall role is different, because I think you've got forwards and strikers, and there are differences between strikers and forwards. Forwards can play anywhere across the front five. So anywhere from winger to mid to up top. For example, John McAtee, who's just recently left Grimsby to go to Luton. I wouldn't class John McAtee as a striker. I would class John McAtee as a forward. However, for argument's sake here, Podge Hammond, who is at Woking, and Kabongo Tishamanga, who is at Chesterfield, they are strikers. They are not forwards, they are strikers. And my take on it is, for everybody here, this is every football fan around the world really, what do you define as a forward and what do you define as a striker? I define a striker by not really going anywhere further away than 30 yards from goal. I class as a striker. As a forward, I would look at attacking midfielders, a la John McAtee, who is a attacking midfielder. I would look at Ruben Rodriguez, who's been looked at in Football League, as not a striker, but a forward. So the big question to everybody that I want to put, especially after having a discussion with one of my subscribers saying that, our manager at Grimsby cannot find a striker. I think there's a way in saying, I think strikers are harder to come by now than forwards. I think forwards are I won't say easily, but they're easier to get hold of. For example, there's been this crazy rumour that Grimsby in for Billy Sharp. I don't realistically think that has happened. I haven't seen that rumour flying around, but other people have told me about it. For example, he would be a striker. He would be a person that you would expect to get most goals from. We go back to Walsall signing of Danny Johnson. That is a striker. Rhys Oates at Mansfield is a striker. But then again, you look at other players that are forwards, that are strictly forward players. And it just makes me wonder, how do you define forward and striker now? And I do think there is a difference. And I'd like to know what people honestly think. Do you think that there is a difference between a striker and a forward? Because in a sense, Grimsby fans, you can answer me this. Would you call Maguire Drew a forward player? Would you call Brendan Keenan a forward player? Brendan can play up top, but he's not an out-and-out striker. It just fascinates me when you go, such and such club can't get a striker. Well, how many out-and-out strikers actually are there in the game anymore? What you would class as an actual striker? You know, I mean, it's like my club. We've had good strikers at the club before now. But actually for probably about since, well, people would say James Hansen for Guernsey was the last striker we had. But I would say the last striker that you would say you could rely on goals in, we haven't had since 2018, which was Wes Thomas. He was the last striker, realistically, if you're going to go goal-scoring striker, that we've had. So it does make this, you know, a viable question for everyone across the leagues. For Adebayo at Luton, he's a striker. He, you will notice, will never go further than 30 yards from goal. He'll always be just before the halfway line, ready to go again. Very rarely will he track back. Not that he can't track back, but why would he need to track back? I would say the biggest striker was Adebayo Akinfenwa. Now, Akinfenwa was a bona fide striker. He wasn't a forward in this kind of terminology, because if he was a forward, he could play anywhere. Adebayo was strictly a striker, because most of the time if you stuck him up there and he got his head on something, you know, you're going to class him as a striker. It's like Kyle Hudlin that's gone to Wimbledon. A lot of people obviously right now don't rate Kyle Hudlin, but Kyle Hudlin is strictly a striker. He's not a forward player per se. A forward player, like I've said already, can play in all kinds of different positions. They can play wide, they can play through the middle, they can play up top, but they're not quintessentially a striker. And I would now like to get people's opinions on, if your manager, and this can be at any club, if your manager says we're struggling, we need a striker, what do you class as a striker and what do you class as a forward? I'm going to say this for my club. My club have two strikers at the football club. By strikers, I mean people that you would quintessentially class as not a forward player, so not an attacking player as such, but a striker. There's two. They are Ryan Taylor and Danilo Orsi. They're strikers. Are they goal scorers? That's another thing to add to the debate. Is a striker a goal scorer? Not necessarily, because Ryan Taylor wasn't. The goal scorer was John McAtee. But John McAtee was not, or is not, I should say, an out-and-out striker. He's an attacking midfielder. So I do think the role of a striker or an attacking midfielder has changed over the years. And I think the meaning of the word striker and forward I think they mean something completely different to what they actually are. Why a lot of clubs can't seem to find strikers. They can find forwards. They can find, like I said with us, Maguire Drew's a forward. He's not a striker, but he's a forward. Brendan Kiernan for us is a forward. He's not a striker. He can play up top. He can play as a striker if you want him to. But he's not a striker. He's not an out-and-out striker. Like I said, back again to certain players will go in. Paddy Madden is a striker. He's not a forward per se. He's a striker. Andy Cook is a striker. Paul Hammond is a striker. Phil Jevons was a striker. Omar Bogle is a striker. And so when I have people say to me that my club can't find a striker, they can find a forward. And what are other people thinking in the Football League? How do you guys, how does everyone else define a striker and define a forward? I define a striker as strictly that. No more than 30 yards from goal, and you expect to get the goals. A forward can play as a striker, but he can go all over. He can play on the wing if need be. He can play down the middle. He can play the side. He can play just off. He can play that 10 role. You know what I mean? He can cut inside. Elijah Sam is a forward, not a striker. So it depends really, and this is down to everyone else, what you define as a striker. I'll give you 3 names that I class as a striker, and I've already mentioned them in the video. Omar Bogle, striker. Paul Hammond, striker. Danny Johnson, striker. They are strikers. Andy Cook, another one, like I've already said, is a striker. But if you look round the lower levels and lower leagues, how many out-and-out strikers actually are there? There's plenty of forwards out there, but how many out-and-out strikers are there? Interesting debate. I want everyone to let me know down below how you define a striker and how you define a forward. To me, forward can play all over the front line. Striker is strictly up top and only up top. No further, like I've said, no further than 30 yards. But leave your comments down below for me. I thought this would be an interesting video to do because I'd like to get fans' input on this. Strikers, forwards. You always hear that on a regular basis. Oh, we've got a forward player, but he's not an out-and-out striker, so we haven't got a striker. And, I've done some research on this with a lot of players, but I want to get you guys' opinion, because everybody at every club, we all want a striker. Every club wants a striker. And we want that name striker. Another challenge I'm going to give for everybody here just before I go. Name me 5 forwards and 5 strikers. I've just named there 5 strikers in the lower levels. Name me 5 strikers and name me 5 forwards. And also, how do you define striker and forward? This should be interesting. That's it for this video. I thought I'd just throw it together and put a debate and a question out there. Please do like, please do subscribe, and share this video as well. Get the wider football community in on this. What do you class as a forward, and what do you class as a striker? And I'll see you very soon. Ciao for now.